Good evening, friends. This is Altazar welcoming you to this installment of Astrology Revealing Sex and Romance Addiction. Another presentation on the series I'm offering indicating how astrology can be a tool for personal and spiritual growth as well as healing, and a deep revelation of what one needs to evolve in their soul growth. Tonight's presentation is both interesting and exciting for many people. I encourage you who have not seen my website or viewed the different types of readings that I do to check it out at www.altazarastrology.com. So, sex and romance addiction is rampant in American society, and I have been an astrologer for over 25 years, and one of my top specialties in astrology, being a master astrologer, is relationship compatibility. And in the course of doing charts for people in terms of their compatibility with prospective partners, lovers, spouse, even colleagues and associates in business, I have been able to observe and have empirical evidence from my clients that there is particular astrological configurations that reveal various types of romance addiction and sex addiction. So that's what we're going to be getting into tonight. So I hope you'll stick around. This is going to be close to an hour overview, and later on in the show we're going to get into talking about specific types of configurations or planetary placements in a person's astrology chart that in fact reveals a proclivity towards romance or sex addiction. Now, unfortunately, in our society and the media frenzy of commercialism, sex is, a base way of promoting business, and through the media, and then that kind of stimulation affects the consciousness of people or the subconsciousness of people, and so that we find that with the proliferation of the internet, that today so many men are caught up in objectifying women, not only from the flashy ads by just regular models, but the extent to which pornography is just a click away on one's smartphone or on one's tablet or laptop. And this has drawn many young men, boys, and older men who were not familiar with the internet into sliding into a lust and a sex addiction, which has adversely affected their significant others, their spouse, and their monogamous or important relationships, as well as jeopardize their jobs and or their legal status. Women as well have been caught up in this pornography, and or at least in the romanticism of relationships as it's come through the media and the power plays we see on soap operas, etc. So unfortunately, this has become epidemic along with the other forms of addiction, including drugs and alcohol in our society, as a means that has destroyed relationships and has contributed to extensive promiscuity and as well diseases. So, with that said, I would like to just point out that astrology, as I've studied it from the spiritual point of view, is not just the marginalized experience that most people are aware of in this society. Astrology is not just about reading your daily horoscope or weekly in the Boulder Weekly, or reading about your sun sign and its character descriptions, whether you be a Leo who's dramatic and charismatic and expressive, or a Capricorn who's ambitious and serious and pragmatic and organized. That's about the extent to which people kind of get into astrology or view it as something that's of substance. My study of astrology, which began over 25 years ago and was in concert with my studies of Buddhism with Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche of Naropa, is about drawing from the original formulations of understanding astrology from the Vedic point of view, that has evolved through as well Hindu practices, the Buddhist point of view on karma and reincarnation, the Chinese astrology, which gives a much deeper perspective on the character qualities that lend towards expressing one's life purpose and true meaning in life. And as well, I've studied Western psychology and Western metaphysics. So I've applied these to my practice over the past 25 years to offer people deep insights, and especially in regards to relationships. So I'd like to talk about as well the dynamic that relationship compatibility astrology has contributed to my understanding of sex and romance addiction, before we get into actually talking about certain specifics in regards to sex and romance addiction. So before I do that, I would like to just briefly point out what is an astrology chart. For those of you who are just familiar with your sun sign or have read your horoscope in the newspaper. So I'm going to put up here the chart of Bill Clinton, who we know had his controversial notoriety vis-a-vis the White House intern, and just show you a brief sensibility of what an astrology chart is. And so basically, astrology chart is based on a person's birth date, time, and location. August 19th, 1946, 8:51 a.m. in Hope, Arkansas. So everyone has a chart that can be configured based on the birth date, time, and location. At a minimum, you just need the birth date and roughly a location, but if you have the birth time, that gives the most accuracy. Then the chart does reveal not only a person's sun sign, he is a Leo, but also the other planetary positions. Mercury, telling us how that person may communicate, or Venus, how that person approaches love, romance, and their expression of affection and their values for lifestyle. So what we see here, also he has Mars in Libra, and Mars tells us more about a person's sexuality and how they express their passion and sexual energy, as well as how they work and approach sports and recreation. When a person has a Mars and Neptune and Venus in a conjunction here, that implies they are, in the sign of Libra, the sign of romance, that they are truly a romantic, but one that has a powerful, passionate sexual energy and proclivity towards secret relationships. At any rate, this is the complexity of a chart that indicates the chart consists of 72 factors that go into describing who you are uniquely as an individual, and the dynamics you may have in terms of your identity expression, your communications, your approach to love, romance, values for lifestyle, your approach to home and family associated with the moon position, and how you take care of your personal needs. So I won't belabor this discussion any further, since many of you, especially in the Boulder area, are hip enough to know what an astrology chart is. So we're going to get right into this presentation here on sex and romance addiction. Welcome, Shari. Good to have you here. And so we're going to proceed now by talking about the different types of relationship readings that a professional and spiritual astrologer does, and how that has contributed to my understanding of romance and sex addiction. And then we're going to get into it. And just to give a quick exposition here for Bill Clinton, one sign that is highlighted for him in his area of romance in his chart, the fifth house, is the sign Aquarius, another air sign. So someone who has their Venus or their Sun in Aquarius might be quite compatible, or their Moon in Aquarius, with Bill Clinton. We also look at the year. He's born in the year of the dog, and in Chinese astrology, someone born in 1950, the year of the tiger, would be quite compatible with Bill Clinton. So this is an example of how we approach an ideal mate profile, sun sign and the moon. And we'll see to what extent there is a harmonious connection between these two people, or whether there's a tension-growth connection. Now, no relationship I've analyzed in the past 25 years is perfect. But I will tell you this, that the people who have the most favorable relationships, the ones that flow well and work out the tensions or difficulties they have, are those that do have at least some basic planetary complementary positions, sun sign to sun sign, such as a Leo to a Sagittarius, or Venus to Venus, such as Venus in Libra to a Venus in Aquarius, or a Venus to Sagittarius, or a Venus to Gemini. So complementary signs, air and fire, or earth and water. So if there's enough foundation of a compatibility that includes the timing of the movement of the planets, along with those complementary planets, we find those relationships have much more of a strength and a foundation for working through the problems or difficulties. So over the years, though, I've analyzed many charts of people who have been married and divorced, people who have been in serial, monogamous, romantic relationships, people who come in and just talk about their enjoyment of continuous sexual promiscuity and even cheating on their partner or their spouse and rationalizing that in some way. So tonight we're going to talk about what are the signs or symptoms in a person's astrology chart. As I have some of them listed here, themes. These are themes related to romance addiction in chart placements, and these are more related to outright sex addiction, and I'm going to explain the difference between the two as we go along. So I'd like to start out by talking about, well, what is love? What is the meaning of love? How does karmic astrology and spiritual astrology relate to this? Well, your astrology chart is said to be your spiritual report card in the school of life. And in essence, the school of life is here to teach us to attune ourselves to spiritual principles that guide our behavior, attitudes, and beliefs towards being more harmonious, peaceful, and loving people. And so one's astrology chart, believe it or not, reveals to what extent a soul has learned that in prior lifetimes. To what extent a soul has been magnanimous, generous, has been a good listener, has been someone who has a healthy self-worth, who has evolved their identity expression in the world. And the chart also reveals the extent to which someone may not have done that, or has more learning and challenges in this lifetime. The good news from this point of view is that unlike certain religions, which, I don't knock, but they just have their limited level of understanding, we have many lifetimes to evolve our soul and learn the meaning of love. This is not a one-shot deal. I've seen enough to know that this is the truth. I'm not talking from a belief system or theory. So the point is that people need to get out of denial in regards to whether they keep getting divorced, but yet they continue to attract the same type of woman or man. Maybe they're not getting a certain lesson their chart is indicating, and that can be revealed. So what is love? And I take from a famous author, M. Scott Peck, in his book, The Road Less Traveled, to summarize this definition. And that is that love is the willingness to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's spiritual growth and that of one's partner. And there's a whole book written on this, by the way, which I greatly appreciate and recommend. But what that means is that has one worked on themselves? Has one embraced a spiritual path and practice? And for those skeptics and those atheists or those just simply not approaching their life in terms of spiritual and personal growth, I can tell you quite frankly that your life and this life is about evolving your soul. You can avoid doing that and come back again and have another chance at it, but the reward is to evolve your soul and embrace practices that encourage inner peace, peace of mind, and self-worth. And that then guides one towards a deeper expression of their identity and purpose in the world, and it also opens them to being receptive to a partner and honest with a partner, having the self-worth enough to share honestly who you are, what your values are for lifestyle, recreation, activities, spiritual path and growth, and be open to hearing who the other person is honestly, not trying to impress them or adapt to them, but to see if in fact you both are willing to work to love each other by encouraging each other's path in life, your growth, your profession, your values for lifestyle and emotional intimacy. So this is a fundamental basis for being in a loving relationship. Now, unfortunately, due to egoic self-will and ignorance and cultural and social conditioning, many people have approached relationships on a lower dimension of energy that is more about emphasizing the chemistry, if you will, the sexual or physical attraction with another person, and the materiality of that person in terms of their socioeconomic status and how good a provider they might be, or as well, to what extent you just simply have mutual shared activities and fun, such as similar interest in movies, physical recreation like bowling, hiking, mountain climbing, similar lifestyle in terms of wanting to live in the city or in a rural or a suburban area. And so there are some mutual values there, along with the chemistry and sexual attraction. But there can be missing the mutual personal soul growth, the mutual communications dynamics that require your ability to evolve greater emotional intimacy. So I need to fix something on my computer there. Okay, there we go. Welcome, Grace. Glad you could be here this evening. So I'm hoping and praying that this computer doesn't take charge, as it has so many things that intervene while I'm talking. So at any rate, what is sex and romance addiction? Well, addiction in itself is when someone is somewhat impulsively or uncontrollably using a substance or a vehicle of activity to escape and distract themselves from the foibles, irritations, and problems in life. So we're going to talk about sex addiction first, and this does apply to men and women. I have had clients of both genders over the years who have just simply been outright sex addicts. Now, a sex addict is someone who is just purely using sex, whether it be pornography or meeting someone in a bar and going home and sleeping with them, or masturbation, or viewing images and whatever. It's using sex. So it's the uncontrollable pursuit of lust, fantasy, masturbation, and physical sexual encounters, including intercourse, as an escapist, drug-like way to medicate the pain of a spiritually and emotionally empty existence or unfulfilling life, and often painful experience. Some people use crack cocaine for that too, and alcohol. And certainly there are many sex addicts who combine addictions. So there's the people who go to the bar and get, and bars are, just a mainstream part of social life for many Americans. You drink and then also carouse and become too promiscuous. So it's an inability to cope with life's challenges or pursue goals that lead to a passion for work, service, or creativity. So that's an evolved definition of sex addiction. And one great author and leader in the recovery movement for sex addicts is Patrick Carnes. And for those listening who are beginning to discern the possibility that they might be a sex addict or have somewhat that problem, I encourage exploring Patrick Carnes' literature. Now, on the other hand, we have romance addiction. And romance addiction can be defined as follows: the serial pursuit of the excitement / novelty of romantic or flirtatious encounters and relationships that often involve intense emotional and sexual entanglement. The pursuit of the lover / soulmate who might be one's salvation from an otherwise miserable, unfulfilling existence. Codependency is the style of connection where lover gives one sense of purpose and mission through excessive sacrifice, caretaking, and or martyrdom in the relationship, which helps one avoid taking care of themselves and finding their true fulfilling life purpose and self-actualization. So here we have it again, that everything seems to come back to, in whatever addiction one has, but especially sex and romance addiction is often described as cunning, baffling, and challenging, because it's no longer about a substance. An alcoholic can go to AA and declare they're not going to drink, or a cocaine or marijuana addict can go to NA and declare they're not going to use the substance anymore. An overeater can go to Overeaters Anonymous and prescribe a specific diet, so they're not going to be eating cake and cookies all day anymore, or drinking liters of Pepsi. But a sex and romance addiction, which many find themselves somewhat indulging after they've in fact eliminated the other addictions in their life, is in the mind and in the heart. And so this is one of the most challenging for many people to transcend, because it truly involves the search for a relationship with a higher power, God, and a spiritual practice that deepens one's consciousness to open to the heart and the joy that comes from spiritual centeredness, rather than the lust in the mind and the pleasure that comes from fantasy and pursuits that can eventually lead to legal, health, and or relationship complications and problems. So we're now going to move on, and before I do, I just want to put in another plug for services that have helped many people in this process, in addition to coming to a spiritual and relationship compatibility astrologer to see specifically the style of your potential sex or romance addiction, is organizations like Sex Addicts Anonymous, or Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, or Sexaholics Anonymous. These are 3 organizations you can Google on the internet and get guidance and go to meetings and on a donation basis and not have to pay an experienced or expensive therapist. So with that said, we're going to move on to the astrology of sex and romance addiction. So there's certain themes in certain generations that can imply the possibility of romance addiction. And so under romance addiction, I have Neptune in Libra generation. So those of you who are born between 1943 and 1957 have largely Neptune, the planet Neptune in Libra. And as well, overlapping that, you have Pluto in Leo between 1939 and 1958. So the two really do combine, but I'm going to talk about each. So the Neptune in Libra generation is the hippie generation, is the generation. Libra is a sign of peace, love, harmony, community, communal living. And it's also, Neptune is a planet that can confuse the ego to idealize romance and fantasy and relationships as being one's salvation in life. So people who have Neptune in Libra is a generation who is, passionately looking for their soulmate, or the fantasy of that soulmate, as someone who is going to be the solution to the loneliness, the misery, the inability to cope with life, the complications of the material world, and share that love and peace and harmony and irresponsibility that Neptune can often imply in shared activities related to music. So, so here you have Woodstock and all the great, communal get-togethers of the 1960s and 70s, and free love. And so the other side of that is the Pluto in Leo. And so Pluto and Leo are those who seek to find an experience of passion and almost a spiritual ecstasy in the context of sexual connection. And so the two of these combined bring into society the advent of Playboy magazine, the media promoting free love and sex as being just fine in polygamous and communal connections, and as well emphasizes the connection of romance and love in the context of music and theater and the media and all of that. So you have the extremes. You have the Beatles, who we have Paul McCartney and John Lennon. John Lennon was a Libra, and Give Peace a Chance, and all the songs, the silly love songs. And then you have the harder edge, the Plutonian type, like the Rolling Stones and Mick Jagger, who talk about the dark side, sympathy for the devil, and also the intensity of passion and sex in the rebellious context of free love. So these are themes that underlie people in their consciousness born in that generation, that unless, burn and learn is another slogan that comes up in the karmic healing process. Unless people start to realize, as many did back in the 60s and 70s as they grew up, and that one needs to find a spiritual center and get grounded in the world and find their true purpose for their soul growth, and then share those values with a partner so that they could find actually a real and true soulmate, as I've described before. So that's a generational dynamic of romance addiction. Now we're going to move on to sex addiction. And sex addiction, and I should point out that there's an overlap between the two. Romance addicts tend to be more seeking the emotional intensity of a relationship, or the delusion of that at least, and then trying to celebrate that with sexual intensity as well. Whereas the sex addict, the more pure sex addict, might care less about an ongoing, or at least the delusion of an ongoing romantic connection or personal connection, and is more inspired by the intensity and quality of the sex and even the anonymity possibilities of it. So there you have your Neptune and Scorpio generation. That's those born between 1957 and 1970. Now, once again, I'm not saying that everyone born in this generation or that generation is a romance or sex addict. There are much more details in a person's chart that go to delineate that possibility that we'll talk about. Or you can have your chart done and I can point it out if it appears to be somewhat of a proclivity for you. But for those who do have the proclivity, the Neptune and Scorpio generation are those who idealize sex, drugs, and the intensity of sexual experience that can come through music as well, or the combination of the three. So you have those who especially, get off on going to bars or mutual parties where there's ecstasy or cocaine shared, and there's communal or promiscuous sex, anonymous sex, pornography through the media. So this is the era of the flourishing of pornography in the media, and because Neptune is related to the media as well. And this kind of intensity of the drug-like experience of sex combined with other drugs and alcohol and media and entertainment. The Pluto in Scorpio generation, what's the difference between Neptune and Pluto? Well, Neptune is more of the gentle, emotional, and the delusion of romance and the soulmate, assuagement of loneliness. Whereas Pluto is more about intensity and the desire to experience an ecstatic escape from reality through sexual experience. So you will have, in some instances, Tantra and the Kama Sutra are practices that can give a deeply heightened sexual experience for those who are involved in an intimate, loving relationship. However, the corruption of the term Tantra and Kama Sutra has been those who have taken that and have been promoting it for people who just simply want a heightened promiscuous experience, which can actually promote addiction dynamic in their consciousness. So the Pluto and Scorpio experience, and the Plutonian experience, is one in which one actually is attempting to experience power and control. Pluto in Scorpio can imply those who are who get off on sadomasochistic experiences in their sexual dynamics, and or if not outrightly, may be engaged in those kind of power struggles with their partner, and or can be experiencing, aside from, well, both Neptune and Pluto types will tend to use sex as an escape or release from their inability to intimately and vulnerably share their feelings and process disagreements and conflict. So you'll find sometimes people with those placements in that generation will, when there's a conflict or frustration or hurt feelings, they may stew in resentment and engage in vindictive dynamics towards their partner. But in the meantime, they'll resolve that inner tension by having sex with their partner. So that's another dynamic here. Welcome, Nancy. So these are generational placements astrologically that we see describing romance or sex addiction proclivity. The generation with Pluto in Libra between 1972 and 83. This is where the people tend to seek out relationships as a transformational or healing experience. They're looking for a marriage or a partner or the proverbial soulmate who can actually somehow evoke healing associated with the wounds they may have experienced from one or both of their parents. And so often, if two people with this generational placement are not on a spiritual path, they can find themselves getting into intense conflicts because they've chosen a partner who's been abusive like their mother or abusive like their father. And the Pluto in Libra dynamic is that whoever your connection is with, whether it be spouse or friend or work colleague, they're there to push your buttons enough so that you might get to the place where you can see that what bothers you the most is a side of yourself that you need to forgive. And the process of forgiveness is very deep in Pluto and Libra people, not to mention everyone, but especially in the relationship dynamic. Now we're going to move on to Uranus in Scorpio. That's those born between 1975 and 1981. So Uranus is a different energy. Uranus is the energy of excitement and novelty and variety and extreme sports, except Uranus and Scorpio people turn sexual promiscuity into an extreme sport. And so this you'll find people, I'm only talking about people who have the adverse aspects in their astrology chart in relationship to Uranus and Scorpio. And those could be people who have a Mars square or Mars opposition to Uranus, or Venus in a square or opposition to Uranus. So I'll start with the Mars. The Mars people are your excitement junkies, those who like rock climbing, bungee jumping, extreme sports, ski jumping, I've already mentioned rock climbing, but also for those who have lost their moral compass and have a woundedness that may be even associated with sexual abuse in their childhood. And I will point out that I can tell from a person's astrology chart if they have had sexual abuse in their childhood. And I even can tell potentially whether it came from a friend, a relative, or one of their parents. This is serious business. And it's important to understand that when a person sees this revealed in their astrology chart, they start to understand that there are spiritual laws and principles. And if one abuses their sexual energy as a function of destroying their soul and diminishing their self-worth and continually reshaming themselves, then that's not good. And that is a basis for healing and recovery. So Mars-Uranus people are those who may tend to seek out in bars or even in your local parks at night, anonymous and short-lived sexual encounters. Uranus is also related to groups and organizations, and in the degenerative side of things, Mars-Uranus aspects implies those who might join these sex clubs or promiscuous clubs, or these parties in which people just have mixed sexual contact with somewhat anonymously. The Venus-Uranus people are much more evolved in a certain sense, if you will, in seeking out a relationship that involves emotional connection, vulnerability, but also excitement. And also they will tend to seek out relationships that are with someone who's from a different ethnic or cultural or racial background. They will still place a value on the possibility of unusual sexual experiences with a committed partner. But part of the problem with the Venus-Uranus adverse aspects, if you have Venus square or Venus opposition Uranus in your chart, is that there is a fear of commitment. Commitment. So, in other words, it's not uncommon. I call it the Elizabeth Taylor aspect, the Johnny Carson aspect. These are two celebrities who had the Venus-Uranus in their chart. Elizabeth Taylor married 11 times. Johnny Carson married, I believe, 4 or 5 times. The Uranus-Venus person has that once the excitement and the novelty of the romance has passed, and the nuts and bolts of daily living and mutually shared values and coping with life's problems seep in and diminish the somewhat drug-like excitement, and the real healing issues start to emerge in the emotional dynamics between the two people, you will find that the Venus-Uranus person finds excuses or somehow contrives philosophical or intellectual reasonings to divorce, split, or move on. And sometimes the Venus-Uranus person will attract that kind of person. So they will find that they're continually abandoned. That they thought everything was going fine. They, after 6 months or a year in the relationship, and all of a sudden, poof, the partner just leaves and then sends a letter explaining, why, it's no longer working for them. And there was no symptoms of that per se. So, but, when a person comes to me with that kind of chart, we have to look in their consciousness. Why do they keep attracting that kind of person? Because there's a side of them that may have a fear of intimacy or commitment. And that's very connected to their soul growth. So, let's talk about some additional placements here. If a person has the Sun or Venus in the signs Libra, Pisces, or Leo, those signs will unfortunately offer you more of a chance of becoming a romance addict. Libra is a sign of partnerships, and Libras do need to find a meaningful, committed partnership or marriage relationship. The question is how they're going about it, and whether they're grounded and based in their clear perception of their values and spiritual growth practices, and a sensibility for prudent evaluation of a prospective partner before jumping into sexual involvement. And I hate to be preachy here, and I don't want to sound like I'm espousing the values of certain religions, but I must say that there is definitely on all spiritual paths, and from the karmic point of view, great value in befriending someone and exploring mutual values for lifestyle, communications, and the potential for emotional intimacy before sexual or too much physical experience with the person, because the physical and sexual can contaminate or significantly affect one's judgment in regards to the higher vibrational dimensions of a truly loving connection. The Pisces can also tend towards the Neptune issue of fantasy and delusion of the soulmate who rescues them from their impoverished, unfulfilling world, or lack of meaningful work and service. The Leo are those who just want to celebrate the exaltation of their own stature. They want the woman, the trophy wife on their arm, and the sense of raising their sense of self-worth by the beauty or the experience with their partner. Now, on the other hand, signs that are more prone to sex addiction, especially Sun, Venus, or Moon position, are Scorpio and Aries. Now, these are two signs. You see, these signs are more ruled by Venus, more the sense of love, the sense of sharing, the sense of expressing personal affection and sensitivity or codependency and adaptation. Whereas Scorpio and Aries are Mars-based signs. And Mars is the sign of passion and lust and asserting connection. And or Mars on the higher dimension are those who are deeply perceptive, emotionally aware, and those who can be engaged in mutual transformation for a heightened mutual spiritual experience. So there's a high side and a low side to each interpretation. But Scorpio is the sign. It's a triptych sign. It's a sign of sex, it's a sign of death, and it's a sign of transformation. And so a Scorpio, unlike most other signs, either is going to embrace a path that involves the phoenix rising from the ashes and embracing inner exploration and healing, or they'll have a proclivity towards addiction to drugs, alcohol, other forms of escapism, and especially along with it, sex. Now, on the other hand, Aries is the masculine fire sign. And so if a person, a woman, or a man has Venus or their sun in Aries, sun sign in Aries, they tend to, unless they've cultivated the inner sense of patience, can tend to be very physical people, recreational people, have a drive for work experience and leadership and take initiative. Aries is the sign of initiative and drive and passion. However, that doesn't bode well when it comes to having an unbridled sexual energy that finds and sees someone they're sexually attracted to, and then takes that initiative to get involved and especially want to consummate that sexual connection, and then along the way they'll build the other things like emotional rapport, or at a minimum the Aries will cultivate the mutual sports and recreational activities, or hiking and bicycling, etc., and then have hot sex after the recreational experience. But again, not all Scorpios, not all Aries. I'm just implying the ones that in their internal astrology chart do indicate this potential for sex and romance addiction. So I'm running out of time, so I want to get into the last dimensions here. Now, in a person's astrology chart, I've shown on Bill Clinton's chart, and you may know in your chart, that we not only have the planets, the Sun or Venus, and we have the planet and the Sun or Venus in Pisces, or you might have Venus in Leo, or you might have the Sun in Scorpio, or your Moon in Scorpio, or you might have, placements in all the different signs. However, and it doesn't matter what sign these placements are in, the last dimension we look at in a chart is the angles that the planets place with one another. And the two angles that are most severe karmically are the square and the opposition. So if a person has the Sun, the Moon, or Venus opposite Neptune, or the Sun, Moon, or Venus square Neptune, then they will have this proclivity, as I've talked about, the Neptune and Libra generation, towards seeking out the soulmate, the proverbial dream-like partner who will assuage their loneliness, be the ultimate solution for their life, and relieve them of any further dimensions of fear or worry in regards to their job, their career, and other life problems that everyone has to deal with. And if a person has the Sun, the Moon, or Venus opposite or squaring Mars or Pluto, that means, and that aspect is more the sign of those who have had sexual abuse possibilities in their childhood. These aspects here are more the possibility of having experienced abandonment dynamics in one's childhood. These dynamics, Mars and Pluto, are more about the potential for sexual abuse, as it's associated with the karma of having that possibility in your prior lifetimes. And so it's the abuse of sexual energy. It's the abuse, the Mars-Pluto dynamic is the extent to which one has deeply or more assertively, if you will, used lust and sex as a drug, possibly even to the extent violently or ruthlessly. But at a minimum, it's the pursuit of sex and seduction and pornography and masturbation and those pure, more sex drug-like experiences as a form of escape and a way to cope with life and deal with and repress or avoid feelings, whether it be anxiety, fear, or even happiness. Many sex addicts will go out and have sex when having a great day, and they have success on their job, like on Wall Street or something like that. They just greedily gotten $1 million from a hedge fund sale, and then they go out and get cocaine and strippers. So at any rate, these are all observed and found in a person's astrology chart. I've had clients come to me, not tell me a thing about them, and I have told them about what kind of sex addiction they might have, or what kind of romance addiction they might have, and even the type of sexual abuse they may have experienced in their childhood, or the abandonment issues, or lack of guidance they may have not had from a parent or elders in their childhood in regards to an approach to relationships and healthy sexuality. So I'm just about out of time. I thank you all for sticking with me on this. Again, I encourage you to contact me if you'd like further explanation or exploration of your chart at www.altazarastrology.com, or email me, altazarastrology@gmail.com. Good night and be well.